Can you see me?
Hello, family. African Esquire, and I'm here with the Federation of African Liberation. We are a Pan-Africanist organization. We seek to unite the diaspora for the common purpose of us fighting for our unity. So I have three brothers here.
We are a Pan-Africanist organization.
Okay, so I have three brothers here who I want to introduce themselves. And we usually have Pierre X. Unfortunately, he's not feeling well, so hopefully he gets better. So everyone, if you just want to introduce yourself, what your position is, and any relevant work that you do in the community. You can start, Victor, if you want.
Okay. Gee, I don't know if I'm turned on now, am I? Oh, okay. I unfortunately have both my cell and computer on. I finally got the computer to work. I'm trying to turn off the cell. So bear with me. Go to someone else. I'm gonna shut my cell down.
All right, I'll go. I'm Dwayne Omwale. I'm the Minister of Information in the Federation of African Liberation, and I'm also an author who's written 17 books.
Okay. And Victor, just mute your mic for now. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, can you see me? Okay. All right, good. My name is Frank Mauba, member of FAL, Minister for Mental Health for African Youth Children.
And we have our guest, Victor. While he's getting everything together, we can just get started. So first, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you for everyone for tuning into the chat. We have a few topics we want to get to. So let's start off with the big topic that I've seen this week. That was Bernie Sanders has made it clear that he does not support reparations. So I remember back in 2016, Bernie Sanders was asked the question, do you support reparations? And he said at that point, I believe he said, no, it's a divisive issue. He didn't really get into it anymore. With further questioning, by Wolf Blitzer at the CNN town hall, he said, well, I'm not going to support reparations because I don't know what it is. And he you know, is very defensive with his answer. First of all, this is supposed to be a progressive, progressive. So I want to back up a little bit from Bernie Sanders, the individual. As Pan-Africanists, well, how do we look at progressives? Are progressive necessarily going to push for the Black community? Are they necessarily on our side? Are they our allies? Or are they people who we should be looking at as adversarial, the same that we should be looking at anyone else? So anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I'll start because the thing that always bothers me with Bernie Sanders, I remember this happened in a debate with Hillary Clinton, where one of the questions was, name two political leaders that you admire. And Bernie Sanders' answers were Franklin Roosevelt, who we know is extremely racist, and Winston Churchill. So, I mean, right there you see, Sanders, he comes from a very Eurocentric worldview in the sense that when he's looking at policies and making policy decisions, he's not really looking at the African people and issues that impact us, which is why he can admire, racist politicians such as Roosevelt and Churchill. And I think I've noticed this is an issue with a lot of white progressives, is that they call themselves progressive, but they don't really see, the African struggle. They're very limited in terms of their worldview being essentially very white worldview. So they don't really look at our issues. And reparations is a very great example of that. Bernie Sanders doesn't view reparations the same way the African masses would view reparations. The historical lens that a politician like Bernie Sanders views the world from is, like I said, very Eurocentric. He's not looking at the world through the eyes of African people and the struggles that we have to deal with.
Victor, I see that it looks like you figured out your issues. Do you want to introduce yourself? Unmute. You just muted yourself.
I did? Okay, I'm unmuted. All right. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I'm Victor. I'm just I'd like to consider myself to be what I hope a good soldier would be in Pan-African movements. That is, as informed as possible, but willing to follow and, if necessary, lead whenever called on to the best of my abilities. So that's kind of me. I don't have any letters behind my name. I mean, I got an associate's in mathematics. I'm a technician, electrician. I'm a musician, and I work with artists. I'm a father. I've got 6 daughters, 3 sons, 17 grandchildren, if that helps. But other than that, that's pretty much where I lay on the table. I believe in reading a lot, if belief is a good word, but I read a lot and research, and I'm always open to do what I consider W.E. Du Bois has done, which is change as you learn. I may take a path this way and then find out, oh, I didn't get all the right information, I'll adjust. I try to put my ego behind me and follow what is right. So that's about me individually. On the subject of Bernie Sanders or about any American politician, it is my position that the concept of white and white supremacy started in America. It started in the late 1600s, pretty close to the end, at the end of the what's called the Bacon Rebellion, when Nathaniel Bacon died, and this concept of white came in as a means for social control, and it has infected the globe. It started on this continent. It was part of the philosophy in creating America, and it has been its social control apparatus. And at the very bottom of this hierarchy are those of us called African American, and then it gradually increases up toward white, depending on where you are. I think that you're not going to find any politician in America that is not in any popular politician that's not a person that believes in the concept of whiteness, which was a concept. I mean, it was brought into the academics, William and Mary College, which I think was pretty much the lead institution to make that a philosophy academically. It's important to not look for them to lead our way. However, we do have to take them where they are on this whole high and low of what is progressive and what is conservative and all of that. That line was moved drastically in the 90s. Clinton had a lot to do, the Clinton administration, where this whole idea of Democratic Party being somewhat liberal, he shifted it to where it would have been a normal Republican conservative is now much higher in the Democratic Party, and the Republican conservatism is fascism now. So, I mean, Bernie Sanders is, if anything, trying to pull it back to almost Democratic, quote, liberal thing. Nothing that's going to greatly affect us for what we want, but it's important to know it. I hope that helps.
No, great, a great analysis. And, just so everyone knows, Victor is one of our members. We do have a policy. If you're an FAL member who's active, you can always be a guest on the live stream. So we're glad to have you, brother. And I agree with your analysis. Progressives does not necessarily mean pro-Black. We're kind of told that it does mean that. But when you actually look at the things that Black people are designated from progressive agendas, we've all Am I freezing up?
A little bit.
Okay. So actually go to Frank because I'm freezing up a little bit. But Frank, what is your thoughts on the progressive versus Black agenda?
Hold on 1 minute. I kind of lost where I am. Where am I? I'm kind of lost. I'm trying to get in back. Sorry, guys. All right, I'm in. Okay, good. Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, I think my intake in that is the fact that when I listened to the interview of Bernie Sanders, where Wolver interviewed him about reparation for Black people, and his answer he gave, it showed to me that when it comes to white progressive or white liberal, it's defined in a way, in a different term, where it actually means, well, white are the superior, and then while Black are the inferior, in a sense that they always want to decide on how or what should be for Black people and what should be given to Black people and how Black people should live. So he never really answered the question that was given to him about reparation to Black people. All he answered was to identify the situation in the Black community, in the Black neighborhood, and to try to fix those problems, and that was his answer. But what I said behind the TV was those problems have been identified since even before some of us was born. But what have the white progressive or the white liberal or white America have done so far to remedy those situations within our community? So everything that you see right now in our community, every progress that we have made have come from ourselves, have come from our own determination and our own courage to fight. So when it comes to those two things, white liberal or white progressive, to me, it's never going to be. I can't say it's never going to be, but I don't see it coming right now. Well, Black and white, like I can see we Black people, African people, don't really have problem, doing things with white people equally, but it just because of that white power or that white supremacy that is in their hair that they don't want to go away with, doing the whole thing, difficult for them. I can't say for us, because we are slowly progressing and we are slowly moving. As when you see history, where we have come from and where we have come so far, it is our determination. So reparation or progressive will only come through our own determination and our own vision to fight, but not with fighting with the white man.
Right. Pierre, no, you just joined the chat. So the conversation we're having right now is on Bernie Sanders and our views on whether or not white people that call themselves progressives are really have the interest of African people at heart.
Okay. Well, I mean, the answer to that is no. Progressive just is a tool used to get votes. Also, I think white people's view of being progressive is a lot different from ours. I don't know how much progress you can make for us if you're not considering reparations. I mean, I'm not a fan of Bernie Sanders. I don't know the hypocrisy in saying that we can't or shouldn't, we meaning Black people, shouldn't get reparations, and him being Jewish. We know the history with America giving Jewish people reparations. So I mean, he's a hypocrite. He's not a progressive. He may have been a progressive 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago. Now he's not a progressive at all. I already know. That's all I got to say about it.
Sorry, everyone. My computer completely shut down. So thanks, guys, for keeping the conversation going. So where are we exactly? So we're talking about Bernie Sanders. So I'm just going to go to my follow-up question, which was, so we know what progressives represent, right? Because historically, you have a lot of people who were willing to work with civil rights, but they were willing to get what they could out of the agenda. So now we have Bernie Sanders in 2019 trying to win the 2020 election. And he says, I don't support reparations for Black people, and that I don't support a check. however, we know that he supported a check for Jewish people. And I'm waiting for someone to ask him that question. Like, what is it about Jewish people that they can get these types of reparations, but Black people can't? Are you trying to say that that Black people don't have as hard of a history? Because if anything, to me, the fact that the American people have been paying reparations to Jewish people for the Holocaust, where America was not the one that committed the Holocaust. Germany committed the Holocaust, and Germany has paid billions and billions of dollars to people who were Holocaust victims. So that makes sense, but America paying all this money to Holocaust victims doesn't make sense. So there's that issue, but then there's the issue of you basically saying that it's okay to have reparations or a check given to people of Jewish descent, but if it's for Black people, for people of African descent, that we can't get a check. We have to have some type of social program, and it's not going to be a social program specifically designated for us. It's going to be a social program that's designated for everyone. So what did y'all make of this, of him making this statement? I mean, what is it about reparations that it shouldn't apply to us, but should apply to people who went through the Holocaust? Go ahead, Victor.
See, I think I did it right. I'm on mute. I'm not muted. Okay. I think it's real important to understand that we won't get, quote, reparations handed to us. That's important, front on the table. Reparations provides an instrument for us to organize and push for revolution. Reparations given to African Americans will only come at the behest of America about to fall completely to the ground. In other words, it's not going to come as some handout social program thing. And I even think those in the ADOS movement understand that this isn't going to be given without something, an arm twist, a real arm twist, an arm, neck, and everything else twist. Usually, as Dr. Gerald Horne says, you don't get anything unless we find ways to get allies at certain times to put pressure on from all sides to where America is looking like, well, we need African Americans to help us continue to move forward, which I'm not interested in doing personally. I want it to fall because I think that's the only way the world will be saved. But all in all, it's not going to come through a political action that's really going to do us benefit. However, it's a good rally point. And I think that's important, just like, sister, you brought up about giving reparations to Jews and how that's supported. Those are things that help wake up many of us that are still asleep. Those are good rallying points. That's all I look for, even with the ADOS movement, where I look on any movement we're going against white supremacy from all different directions. This is still a good point, in my opinion, that we push for it. We ask those questions. We keep bringing it up. We keep showing that, hey, I am interested in seeing some money get to our people, some land get to our people, some freedom, release people from prison, give us all free, forgive all of our student loans and all of that. If we can get that, yes. But in the process of attempting to get that, we're creating revolution. And that's important to me, just to see where you guys stand.
Absolutely. Any follow-up to Victor?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing I will add about the reparations discussion. One of the things I noticed that comes up is this question of what form should reparation take. A lot of people think of reparations in terms of maybe just being a large check, but one thing that I want to mention, that's specifically relevant to where I live. Last year I went to an event commemorating the Koi massacre that we had here in Orlando. And one of the things that stood out to me is that people were talking about all the progress that we've made since then, because the level of racial violence that existed during that period, we don't have now. Obviously, Americans have more freedoms in terms of voting. But the thing that stood out to me is that no one was addressing the fact that as a result of this massacre, white people took all of that land from African Americans, and to this day, they still maintain control over that land. So I think not only is reparations a question of money and checks, it's also a question of land was stolen, communities have been destroyed. Flint is the issue that we've spoken about. Flint deserves reparations just in terms of fixing the infrastructure and alleviating some of the damages that's caused. So I think reparations is a very large, encompassing topic, and one of the reasons why I noticed Bernie Sanders and a lot of politicians are uncomfortable with reparations is that you really can't have a discussion about reparations without acknowledging the level of injustices that America has inflicted upon African Americans. And we have this perception that things are bad, but we're making progress, and it's not as bad as it was in the 60s. But like I said, a lot of the institutions, land, things that were destroyed or stolen, haven't addressed. We haven't gotten redress for any of those things that have happened, and there's still a hesitancy to really acknowledge the fact that America still, to this day, treats African Americans as second-class citizens.
What about some progressives who are saying that CNN asking him this question and pushing this issue was them trying to, I guess, sabotage Bernie Sanders? Because, we do know that CNN, for example, is a conservative platform, and I've seen someone ask in the chat, why did, I'm surprised that they even asked them about reparations, given the fact that they haven't really asked any other candidates that. So is the reparations issue being used as a political tactic to try to trip up certain candidates? Because, not a lot of people have been asked this question at their town halls. And Bernie Sanders was asked that question. Is this like a tool that's being used, and not just a tool, but a way to try to control the narrative as far as the Black vote? Anyone jump in? I think, Victor, you're trying to talk.
I'll jump in to add real quickly that I think the reason why Sanders was asked about reparations specifically is because the last time he ran, he actually did come out against reparations. So I think people are trying to gauge where Sanders is now on the reparations issue because he's someone that's opposed it in the past. But, that's my view on that.
It obviously is a test point. Are you still, it's the kind of thing that Clinton did with the Democratic Party to make it hard on crime, which really was hard on African Americans, to say, hey, I'm down with white supremacy. And so Sanders is being forced in the corner to say, I'm down with white supremacy. It's easy to say I'm not for reparations right now because we've discussed that, because it's a complicated issue. It is a complicated issue. Probably the safe political thing to do would be to say, I'm willing to listen to all the angles. Him saying right away, no, I'm not for it, is more of a white supremacist dog whistle, if you will. It's kind of, hey, I'm still white supremacist. I am for, it's just what happened with, what was it? Affirmative. I don't know if you guys ever saw this book before by Katz Nelson, talking about affirmative action was white. Basically, it's talking about FDR. And when that came out, FDR came out with the things like Social Security, unemployment, and all the safety nets, and the Southerners that still had slavery under Jim Crow didn't want African Americans included. That's the same thing that's going on now. Bernie Sanders is saying we need to bring some safety nets back, but then the slaveocracy that's going on right now is saying you need to do that dog whistle and say, but I'm not for that going to African Americans. Reparations is a good point to do that on. So that's the way I see it.
I also see a question from Yeshua. He says, does reparations mean a check for every Black person or investment in Black communities? And I think Dwayne kind of answered that. It could be a lot of things. In the case of Holocaust victims, they actually did get actual money, and they also had programs, and they also had investment into their institutions. And so there's a bill right now in Congress to just study, reparations. And I would think that the end of it would be to try to come up with some type of real way that reparations can actually be used to uplift the Black struggle. So that's something that we're going to have to basically figure out, or something that's going to have to be talked about. I do have a follow-up question. I remember, and I don't remember a lot from back when Obama was president, because I wasn't too politically astute back then, but I do remember he was asked the reparations question, and he did even worse than Bernie in that he said, to me, reparations for Black people is education. And, you know, which is like, well, is that, you know, what does that mean? What did Obama's presidency do when you look at not just the issue of reparations for Black people, but the fact that he actually was one of the people to pass a bill giving reparations to Jewish people? What did it mean to have a Black person in office, if anything? Pierre, we'll go to you.
I think it definitely helped confirm how racist of a country this is, for sure. I mean, I'm on record saying that I don't think that Barack Obama's presidency did anything specifically to help the conditions of Black people throughout the country. But like I said, I do think that him being president, just seeing a person that looks Black as president, and all the hate that he received simply because of that, just really confirmed that this is still a racist country. Because I think when he was elected, we were starting to, for some reason, feel like, okay, maybe we're getting over this hump, and maybe we're a post-racial country. And I think that's one thing that it did do, was to confirm that that's not the case, especially since we did have a Black candidate, and we had a mostly Democratic House, and we still wasn't able to get not one thing to address the major issues of Black people. Nothing just addressed mass incarceration, nothing addressed reparations, nothing really addressed violence. For instance, in Chicago, it's still as violent as it was when Obama came into the presidency, and when he's been long gone, it's still just as bad. Black neighborhoods are still just as poor. Nothing that he passed addressed any of this. And Obama, just like Bernie Sanders, you know, has to say no to reparations, because that's just like I think Victor pointed to it, like that's a point where you have to show where you're at, right? You have to show, like, if you go for that, then you're going against white supremacy. And even Obama couldn't do that and still be able to be who he was. But yeah, I mean, you know, I'll let somebody else talk on that.
Yeah, anyone else want to follow up on the Obama presidency's stance on reparations?
Well, may I? Okay. Well, late Dr. Amos Wilson had made a statement. He said that, you know, you get more Black police, more Blacks are arrested. You get more Black judges, more Blacks go to jail. Well, in that vein, when you get Black politicians, they have a job, and we can celebrate somebody having an income and a position and all of that, and they can say things, but the less we get politically represented, okay? You get more Black police, instead of us being protected and the police working in our favor, it works against us. You get more Black judges, we get more Blacks going to prison, more Black prosecutors, more of us get more charges piled up. Black politicians, we get less representation. Presidency of Barack Obama showed that to its highest. When we wanted to be represented, when people like Cornel West and others said it's time to put, you know, the presidency's feet to the fire for Black people, we were attacked by other Black folk that said, shh, don't bring it up. White folks might realize he's Black in office. Kind of goofy attitude. We couldn't get anything. In other words, what Dr. Amos Wilson said, when you get someone in those positions under the American construct, it works the opposite. So we weren't represented with him in office. And we see that, I see that in Dayton, Ohio, with Black politicians in office. Some of them are good-hearted people, but, you know, their hands are, quote, tied. In other words, that's what happened. Our political movement, and Amos Wilson said something really great, because I think you brought up about, does voting help? Am I correct? You brought up about voting. Well, Amos brings up, did we vote to get the right to vote? Right. Our political movement does not have to come under the American construct. And that's what, in fact, that's the fear of America when we do move outside of the construct. And that's shown up with the study in 1970, what was it? The Crisis of Democracy. It was a big study. And in that study, it was an excellent study. We need to study it, where it showed that it's political participation outside of the American construct that was the problem. That was the crisis of real democracy. So no, we can't look for Obama or any Black elected official under this construct to really have power to do anything. We try to take advantage of it. I think we should if we can, but we're not going to get real movement that way. Real movement is what you guys are doing.
Hey, I love your answer, and actually it feeds really well into a question we have. Brother Darius Lamb asked, do you think the political system in America will ever change, and should we look outside America for better opportunities? This kind of is a good question for a number of reasons. One, the other thing I was going to ask is, do we need to look at outside of America? And when we look at Malcolm X, for example, he said we can't rely on these racist politicians to actually pass things that are going to benefit us. They've showed you who they are, and they've showed you they're not going to put you first. Therefore, Malcolm's plea is that we have to stop talking about civil rights and we have to start talking about human rights. Do we need to go outside of the American system and try to go to the international system, be that the United Nations or the African Union, which we know is under colonial control right now, but in an ideal world, a free African Union? Do we have to look outside of the jurisdiction of the United States to actually have a formidable chance of getting these things actually passed? Let's go to Frank. I know we haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah. Actually, I'm sorry, my camera is kind of off due to some technical difficulty. Yeah, but I mean, it is true. I really love the answer of my brother right there. That's a very good answer that he gave. I love the answer. I've been saying this. It's the same thing. We African people we can't move on if we want for white people to understand our situation. We will never move on. All we have to do is we have to silence white people in the sense that we should stop complaining or asking them of even human rights, because what we asking them of human rights is that we asking them for equality, and they don't want for Black people to be equal to them under those circumstances. So we just have to look up the scope of going outside of the United States and seeing how we can build ourselves up. If the white supremacy or if white America see African people doing things for themselves and moving, within the direction of progress that empower them, then we will become to realize, or the white supremacy will become to realize the power of Black people, and that will be the time where they will come and ask for the true humanity, that where they will want to be part of African people. But until then, they will never understand, like Tiana said, the AU, which is run by some colonial influence. Those African organizations that seems to represent us need to get away with any colonial influence, because you can't be within our kind of scope and you think you're going to represent of Black people. We have to fund our own organization and empower our own organization, because those organizations need to run on our agenda. If they can't run on our agenda and run it on white supremacy agenda, why would you think they will favor anything that have to do with African people or Black people? So we have to come from that scope of thinking that when we talk to the white man will understand, because the reality we should try to get is that if they didn't understand Malcolm X, they didn't understand Kwame Ture, they didn't understand David E.B. Du Bois, they didn't understand Dr. King, they didn't understand Kwame Nkrumah, they didn't understand Thomas Sankara, Amilcar Cabral, and all of those people. Why would you think they will understand any revolutionary right now. And recent time, they didn't understand Muammar Gaddafi. And recent time again, they are not understanding Judah Malema. Why would you think they will understand us in any ways? This is why we need to realize that we have to get on our own.
Absolutely. Anyone want to follow up with that?
Well, sister, you were saying, should we look to the international community for allies at certain points? And I think we should. And I think Dr. Gerald Horne, who has written like 34 books, has brought this up over and over with his research. He's a history professor and an excellent speaker. He has shown that any advantages that we have got at any point in time, whether it's African Americans or Africans in the diaspora, we have tied our hands to people that had a bone to pick with whoever was in our way, for us, the United States. So when the Cold War in Russia was an issue, we would get what we can from them. Right now, right before World War II, before they bombed, before Japan was forced into the bombing of Pearl Harbor, that's where the Asiatic black man came from. There was a tie that was going on politically with Japan. We have had points that we have tied to people that were antagonists to the United States to get advancements at certain times. I think that it's important that we realize that we can ally with different groups and different people at different times for different issues. And allying with someone doesn't mean you're tied to them from now on. But if there's something that China will offer us to help us get an advantage, then we can ally with China for a certain point. The minute that they cause an issue somewhere else, then we move again away from that. But we have to learn how to work, because that's how it's done everywhere else. Mm-hmm. That's how things happen. You pick and choose your allies according to your objective. So we need to look at that. We need to always look at that. That's why I'm one person that's not for interfering with the opposition against the so-called wall by the Mexican border. If white supremacy wants the wall, I don't want them to have it. If white supremacy has an issue with gays, I'm for the gays to get what they want. If white supremacy, if this helps America keep its strength and keep my people put down, I want them hurting. I want them hit from every angle. See, I look at the biggest thing we all talk about is there's no unity with black folks. They divided and conquered us. Well, now I'm looking at, that might be an advantage. That's why I take the ADOS movement and any other movement. Maybe our division now, we hit from all angles and deplete their resources because now it's coming from everywhere. I want them to struggle dealing with things. I want America to overextend. And that's what they're doing right now. If they have an issue with, I want the Palestinians to get what they want. I want these over here I want everyone. I want ADOS to get reparations. And we do a modified reparations movement. I want it all coming. That's the only way we beat this beast. They divided us. Well, let's work it against their advantage, because now they can't go for one organization. They have to look at thousands. So yeah, I'm for international movement.
Absolutely. And it's a powerful point. People, you have to study history. Like, anytime that white supremacy has been backed into a corner, it's been because it's being hit from multiple angles. So, for example, when you look at the decolonization era, it was following World War II when you started having all of these different African countries pushing back against the colonial powers. And these powers, first of all, they were already depleted from World War II. So all of them were suffering as far as financially. A lot of people had died in World War II. So they were already hurt. But then on the other side, you had all these Africans in different parts of the world actually pushing back and revolting. And the fact is they couldn't afford to continue colonialism as it was practiced. So now we know that they had to morph that colonialism from prior to the decolonization of Africa into a new animal called neocolonialism. But that's basically how things have actually been achieved. Same thing with Blacks in America. When you look at following the communist, Russia versus Cold War, the Cold War. With the Cold War, America was so occupied with Russia. They were trying to control, the narrative in that regard, because there was a big scare. Are you communist? Are you communist? W.E. Du Bois was looked at he was scrutinized for having a socialist agenda. Different people were basically ostracized for possibly being communist, let alone being communist. So their obsession over their issue with Russia caused them to actually relinquish some power to the Black community. So when you look at the civil rights legislation, that wasn't done just because of Dr. King. I know that we're told, it was just Dr. King and, he was marching on Bloody Sunday, blah, blah, and, we're told this narrative that white people seeing Black people being beat on TV and it just hurt their heart so much. And they're like, oh, we have to stop doing something. We have to pass voting rights. That's not true at all. Actually, it was in their interest to pass those bills. It was in their interest to do that, because if the fact was the way that Black America was lit on fire at that time, if you didn't give some type of piecemeal gains in order to get them to settle down, we were about to turn this whole system upside down. And so the system said, okay, we already have this thing going on with Russia, and we have these Blacks who are revolting. We have the Native Americans were revolting at that time. The Mexicans were revolting at that time. Multiple communities, women's movements. It was too much for the white supremacists to try to keep going as it was, and therefore they passed a lot of civil rights legislation. So think about that, and always we have to study history. And sometimes I think we get in our imagination of what will get us what we want. If we're trying to get reparations, we think, oh, we'll get reparations by trying to guilt the people, or we'll get reparations by using logic. Those things don't really matter when it comes to power. With power, you have to basically threaten power. And if you're not ready to threaten power, then your ability to actually wage a actual war against anything that benefits white supremacy, it's going to be diminished. Because think about how easily different things have been diminished when it comes to movements inside of the Black community. Think how easily it was for them to get Black Lives Matter out the way. Think about how easily it was for them to just target one group whenever we were trying to do something, and next thing you know, everything's gone. We have to think of ways that we can be not just cause some noise, make some noise, but we can actually be a threat to the system to the level where they'll have to relinquish some power in order to actually continue on with their agenda. So Pierre, Frank, Dwayne, any other follow-up?
Yeah, I think the question was basically, can we obtain some type of freedom or through the American system? And I think we all agree the answer is no. Because as we know, we came here to be slaves. All right. We came here to be slaves and servants and help. All right. We didn't come here to be citizens. Okay. We resisted slavery. All right. We fought for our independence in the Civil War. All right. And then instead of taking the traitors, who was the Confederacy, and saying, all right, you betrayed the country, right? You should be put to death or exiled. They accepted them back because that was their own kind, even though they committed what is supposed to be the worst crime of treason, right? Going against the state. They lost the war, they conceded, they accepted the South back, they gave them the land, they gave them the resources, although the Blacks, the slaves, fought with the state to win the war. They gave the traders the resources in the land, which they had said that they would give us. All right. Then, all right, they determined, okay, we're going to consider, they determined we're going to consider Africans 3/5 of a person. Right. Then they said, okay, well, as an African person, you don't have a right to basically to vote, not even to file a lawsuit in this country. Right. And they never really ever said anything different. Like this is how they feel about us. They don't see us as equals or even humans. If this is the system that we've always had, and if you look at it now, there's not much that has really changed in the mindset of how the white American, thinks about African people. We have gained a lot, but we have gained a lot by dying a lot, by bleeding a lot. Like she just like Afrikaness just said, they didn't see us getting beat and just say, oh man, we should help them. Like, no, a lot of things had to happen just for us to get the rights that we have now. It can't happen in the system. It can't, like, the only two ways it can happen is through this Pan-African way of, other nations and other people judging America, or an overthrow of the government by Black people in America. Those are only two ways. Like, and we've tried to overthrow the government several times. They just suppressed it by killing people and locking all of them up, making them political prisoners. Basically the point I'm trying to make is, within the system, you just, as an African person, you can't win because everything you do supports the system, that hates and oppresses you. That's my standpoint.
Yeah, let me just add up. You see, like Pierre and Victor gave a very good point. You see, on a battlefield, sometimes when you retreat, it doesn't mean you are losing the war. When you retreat, it just means you are going to regroup yourself, to re-empower yourself, to come by, to get ready for the enemy, or to take down the enemy. I think Victor said something like, we, going internationally to ally, for example, with the Chinese or any other group of people that can empower us to fight the system, or that can empower us to become who we want to become. And then if that group is now doing something contrary to our agenda, we have the right or the power to disengage with that entity. So in the same way, we cannot fight the system within the system. We have tried several times, so many times, to fight the system within the system, and we are not really succeeding because the system is really built constitutionally over and over, generation upon generation, and the system are being taught against us and for favor of the white supremacy. So in order to fight the system, it is true that we have to look outside. We have to go back on the continent or elsewhere and regroup ourselves and ally with other entities that seek our agenda and come out for the system. Yeah.
Sorry. So all right, so I want to move on a little bit. Before I do, though, this is obviously reparations right now is very related to what's going on with the ADOS hashtag. I know, Victor, you wanted to give your response. We did one previous video where we addressed as a group our thoughts on ADOS. Victor, I think you wanted to just give your own response before we move on.
Let me unmute. I'm reading something from one of the chat that came up earlier that kind of hits on this. Someone, I think JM, said, if I'm reading it right, by ADOS aggressively advocating for reparations, Jamaica and Haiti will get the strength to sue the Queen of England and France. This will impact everyone if you sue the country of your lineage. Where I'm looking at this ADOS movement, this kind of parallels what I think this person is trying to relay, is that we need to hit from all angles, like I was talking about earlier. We need to have a new code. I remember Tariq Nasheed talks about being, quote, on code against white supremacy. We need to define that, because part of the on code to me is what Tariq is not doing enough of, or others, and that is, we need to not attack the other Blacks that are going after white supremacy in their own way with whatever they see is effective. As long as they aren't joining on board, as long as they're attacked, the ADOS movement is not saying, hey, give this section of African Americans or American Blacks who were descendants of slaves this amount of funds and money and we'll support your white supremacist movement forward. As long as that's not the agenda, as long as they're not saying, can we be the new 5 civilized tribes? Okay, as long as that's not it, we need to find a way to be supportive, but maybe modify another movement for reparations or whatever we think is necessary, that it's more inclusive to what we see. But we need to allow those attacks to happen and let them not divide us on the attack on white supremacy. That's the unity. But at the same time, still be able to be democratic enough to let it exist. I don't want to attack them. Yes, I have issues. I definitely have issues with the personality of Sister Yvette Carnell. I have some issues that are brought up, you know, even by Antonio Moore, who really is a little closer to the originator of the ADOS movement, which is influenced by William Darity, who is the one I think, Sister, you brought up about there is a bill in Congress. That's part of what that information network is that led to the ADOS. But regardless, if they just say the only Africans, only people we want to get paid are these people here, if it's from, which I don't think they mean, from 1865 forward, okay, great, fight. Now, if I'm really interested in reparations for what I consider or we consider a better movement for it, we should be doing the same thing at the same time, saying, right on, handle your business, go forward. Because the way I look at it, if there was, which I doubt, there was any gain that comes to African Americans, then we go after those folks to get them to help monetarily or whatever resources they get to support the Pan-African movement. Our issue is to always educate so that we don't have to stop there. I don't want to interfere or put them down. I just want to say, I would do it better or a different way this way, but hey, you're going to get my support. What do you need me to do? Sign something here? Good, I sign that there that I want you to do it and move forward. At the same time, I'm going to Julius Malema and whatever he needs done. In fact, I want one of those outfits. Okay, I think that's what I look for, and that's what I wanted to share with you guys when I heard the motion, the attitudes that we have against the personalities leaving the Pound, ADOS movement. I think that's here, and it's still a fight, and we just need to keep it so it doesn't become, hey, we want to be the new 5 civilized tribes. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, 5 civilized tribes? That was the issue that supposedly came up, I believe Cherokee, I don't know, Sioux or some others, where they were wiping out Native Americans, and in order to keep from getting their nations completely wiped out, they went along with the white supremacist agenda. In fact, they were part of even helping capture escaped slaves and trading slaves, and that was the 5 civilized tribe that said, hey, stop killing our people off. We'll join your agenda, America, please. And I don't want our people to do those things when they make their movements. That's my biggest concern.
All right, thank you. So let's move on. I'm going to go to Dwayne. There's been some African elections that happened last week. Nigeria, Senegal. A lot of people are, particularly with Nigeria, a little bit disappointed as the president in Nigeria. A lot of people felt like there was some shady dealings with how the election went through. Can you give us the broad scope of what's basically happening over there and what you think we need to be pushing for as far as African elections?
Yeah, so the situation in Nigeria that people are disappointed about is that the incumbent president won re-election, and the issue was that the elections, when they were originally supposed to be held, were then postponed for an entire week, and there were issues, concerns about rigging and other issues as well too, because people felt like the Nigerian government had so long to prepare for these elections. Why would you postpone it a week? They did it day before the elections were supposed to be held. But what's particularly interesting to me about the Nigerian election is that this week I actually sat down and had a conversation with a classmate of mine who's from Nigeria. We spoke about the political situation there, and he said the issue in Nigeria was that it wouldn't have mattered who won that election because nothing ever really changes in Nigeria, regardless of who gets elected. So the conversation we had wasn't necessarily a conversation, and you did a video about this recently, actually, about creating change through elections. So our conversation was that what Nigeria and other African countries need to do is to completely change this political system that they have. Otherwise, we'll have a situation where you just go to the polls, elect a new president, but the same system remains in place. So the conversation we had, one of the things we also spoke about was that I think a lot of Africans on the continent are starting to understand this. A few years ago, there was actually an uprising in Burkina Faso that drove the dictator out of power there. Ethiopia had similar uprisings that drove the dictator out there. And we're seeing other uprisings in countries like Togo, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, South Sudan. So I think there's a growing feeling among people on the African continent that it's not necessarily enough to just go to the polls and to vote for these politicians, because kind of issues like rigging and other irregularities that happen in these elections, but it's a bigger issue of what kind of political system do you have. So in Nigeria, for example, when Goodluck was the president, people were dissatisfied with the corruption in Nigeria and other issues going on. So Buhari was elected. Now Buhari was president. Things have actually gotten worse in Nigeria in terms of poverty since Buhari's been in office, and he was just reelected again. So I think what we need to look at with Nigeria and other African countries is that we have to look at the political system as a whole and not necessarily the individual politicians, and we've seen this time and time again, you could remove individual figures and the system will continue on as it's been.
Anyone else have thoughts on the elections that happened this week? The Nigerian election was the big one, I know. Let's see, I'll pick someone. Frank, you have any thoughts on that election?
You see, the problem of Africa, what happened in one nation is the same that happened in other nations. So with the African continent, if one nation is free, automatically the other nation become free. If one nation is corrupt, automatically the other nation become corrupt. If one nation is fighting or war against its people, automatically the other nation will do the same thing against its people, because it has been run by the same system. It is being run by the same individual who been running the continent from time to time, as we had the so-called shame independent. When you see the election result of Nigeria, obviously you know something was wrong somewhere. This was an individual who been in power, where the country came to a point where it was difficult to live and to even live and sustain your family, where people complain. This is a nation where election time, people had the hope of 90% of taking this guy out and re-electing, or let's say electing somebody as not re-electing this individual. And then right after the election, for the election result to be announced, and then taking like 4 days for the result to come out. So you should know the fact that the same colonial system, the same colonial institution, the same colonial constitution or mandate still runs on the continent, and they still have those power to make decision and to say what need to be done in their interest, or to protect their interest. Exactly what happened with Nigeria days gone election is a clear indication that the colonial system still have power within Nigeria.
Okay, so I want to pivot the subject a little bit. We're going to go to what happened in the U.S. this past week. Stephon Clark was murdered by I believe it was the Oakland police last year. Unfortunately, we found out that the cop who shot him, I believe, was it 10 times or more, is not going to face any charges for shooting this man while he was basically in his, I believe, in his grandmother's backyard. They said he had a gun. However, it turned out he only had a cell phone. And, you know, now his family won't get justice. Of course, I know what a lot of people are thinking. This is just the same thing over and over again. It shouldn't be something we're surprised at this point. So I want to talk about Stephon Clark, but in the context of self-defense. I want to go to Pierre because he is our specialist in self-defense. What should we be doing in 2019? Is the self-defense narrative relevant? And I also want to ask a devil's advocate question. Is it possibly, you know, suicidal to think that you can defend yourself against a police state? That, you know, obviously if, you know, you do retaliate, you know, you risk further, you know, attacks from this same system. So Pierre, what are your thoughts on that?
Against the police state, how can you defend yourself? Or just overall?
What is the relevance of the self-defense conversation in 2019 in scope of what happened with Stephon Clark? So we see that the system will not defend us, the system will not protect us. What should we be doing as far as self-defense? And, you know, is it possibly a self-destruction button to think that you can defend yourself against this type of system?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing we can do is organize and put our heads together, put our bodies together, form groups, form protection groups. As far as individually, like we cannot, like it's really nothing we can do. Like as a Black person, you just are not safe. At any moment, the police can decide that they want to take your life or do whatever harm to you. And even if it's on tape, and even if you have witnesses, and even if, you know, if you was completely in the right, we've seen over and over and over again, 9 times out of 10, you will get no justice. So we really are just, this is why this has to be considered. Like, I don't only think we need to ask for reparations as far as this upcoming election. We need to really ask that any candidate should declare a national emergency based on the toxic racial relations in this country that continues to continue this Holocaust of Black people. Everything has to stop, and that's what we don't do. Like, we have to just for one day, like everything has to stop so we can really just see what's really going on. Like, if you can't stand in your backyard on a phone when you're Black, then nobody's safe. Like, and that's what we don't look at it. Like, we think, okay, I'm all right. I got this. I'm good. I got a nice house. I got a car. I'll just avoid police. But you just never know. Like, you never know when it's going to be you. And if it's not you, you never know when it's going to be your kid or a friend of yours. Like, so we have to organize, like, to avoid these type of things. As far as dealing with the police personally, like, I would do everything I can to avoid dealing with the police. When you do interact with the police, you have to remember that this is not a normal interaction as it would be if it was a white person and a police officer. You're a Black person interacting with a police officer. I'm not saying that you should let the police officers do whatever they want to. You should stick to your rights. If they want to consent, if they want consent to search, no, you should not give them the consent to search. You don't have to show your ID if you're not being accused of a crime. These things you should stick to, but you also have to remember that this person can kill me and they will get away with it. So be smart and be, remember, survival is first, right? You want to survive, but we have to be proactive. We have to figure out what we're going to do. At this point, like, I mean, I could take Chicago for example. Like, we know the feds came and did an investigation on Chicago Police Department. Like, even the feds said that this was a racial, like, this is the department they're racist. They literally said this is a department that abuses people. I don't remember the exact words, but it's basically abuses people because they are Black and they have a history. Like, the feds put out a whole, and still, we still haven't made a mass movement to counteract that. So really, we're going to have to get the people together that really can see what's going on, and then organize against that.
I see a comment I really like. If anyone has seen this past week, Julius Malema, he did a speech called basically telling Africans, you know, why are you afraid when you already did? And this is, I thought this was a good, you know, that was a funny, you know, saying to me, because I know I was talking to my husband about this, and I'm like, you know, when you look at the conditions inside of certain countries, yes, they're bad, but when you look at some of these migrants who will get on these ships to Europe and risk these shit, like with their babies, get on these little, not even ships, these little floater boats over to Europe, risking everything to basically go into Europe. And once you get into Europe, you're not even guaranteed that you're going to be treated right. You're not even guaranteed that you're not going to be captured. And they have these prisons where they're torturing Africans who have been trying to immigrate to Europe. And so it's like, you are risking a lot. You're risking death in the ocean. You're risking torture inside of these immigration prisons. You're risking a lot. And the question is, you know, if you are risking that much, you know, why not? You already did. Why not go home and try to do something that could possibly cost you your life? So, but I want to go to Victor, because I know that this is actually a topic that you suggested to us. Let's just talk specifically first about us in America, Africans in America. What is self-defense in 2019? I know it's a bleak thing to think about, because we are inside of, as you know, Pierre laid out, we basically are inside of a country where the majority, we're a minority, and we don't, you know, necessarily have what we need to actually have a real sense of self-defense or a sense of protection in this country. So what is self-defense to you in 2019?
Oh, okay. I guess there's a few things to bring up here. One is self-defense does not necessarily meeting someone in the middle of a battlefield and say, here we come. Anybody that studies martial arts and those things, deception and all kinds of advantages are sought by not going that direct route. I think that it's important that we understand what you were saying earlier, the issue of, well, let me put it this way. There's a group from the 70s called The Last Poets. And they had a poem called Just Because. Now, they had a lot of great poems, but Just Because, in the end of the poem, the end line, if I'm paraphrasing it right, is, you say you don't want to die because. Well, I don't want to die because. You say you don't want to die because there's no cause for you to die for. And what causes you to say that? At the end of the poem, they say, it's better to die for a cause than because. And that's pretty much the way I look at what you were describing about Africans getting on boats. We have to understand revolution happens all the time, but it has been a standard in America from slavery to suppress the reality of slave rebellions. If you read history in this country, we revolted all the time. Our problem right now is we don't have the political fortitude to announce when revolution happens before our eyes. Micah Johnson in Dallas, who shot those officers, was an African rebelling against white supremacy who was killing our people with impunity. And that's what it was. But we don't have the political fortitude to lay honor on someone who was willing, whether we would do it or not, who is doing those things to say you get a repercussion for violence begets violence. Here's your violence back. We don't have the fortitude to support Colin Ferguson, who had the same attitude. I may not agree with how he did those things, but we have revolution. Somebody put on the live chat, police officers are shot all the time in LA. I think that's true. We do fight back. One of the books, history books, that was constantly attacked and hidden was American Negro Slavery Revolts by Herb Aptheker, where he documented constant fear of slave rebellion. We win against all odds. Haiti is a prime example. We look at, I got books galore where it's talking about the fact that we revolt, we shoot back, we fight back, we find ways, we slow down work. We'll do whatever it is to fight back. Now, how do we organize it is another matter, But I was talking to someone else. We look at Black Wall Street. We have people talking about we need to, quote, build another Black Wall Street. Well, don't build another one without realizing that this country, the minute you become too successful, you're taking money out of their pockets and they come after you in a variety of ways. What defense will you have? And that's part of our self-defense. What defense? What is the best we can do? I'm not going to sit here and watch some crazy white cop start beating one of y'all to death and I'm going to stand there. Now, some people may not have the fortitude to fight back and they'll video it. That's a sign of self-defense. Some people may just say, okay, I'll go around the corner of his tree and I'll start throwing rocks. I'll do something to fight back. We have to discuss that. And we have to have an attitude. We're just not going to sit here and let it happen. But the biggest problem, I think, is that we don't announce that it is happening, that we don't show where it is happening. Because when we show where it's happening and we keep letting that be known, that people like Micah Johnson are every day, and the more you do this to us, the more that keeps happening, it ends up causing some people to be hesitant on beating down blacks when they're on their cell phone.
So I want to move to the international scope of this conversation, but does anyone else want to comment on the domestic as far as in the U.S. before I move on? Okay, so there's obviously the issue of us here in the United States. And, I remember one day actually on our chat, our leadership chat, we brought up the idea, do we think that there's ever going to be a time where Africans in America will ever be able to live peacefully in the United States? Meaning, is there ever going to be a day where, if I have a child, I don't feel like my child is at risk going out into the streets? And all of us said no. There's never going to be a day where we think that Black people will be safe on the streets in the United States. It doesn't matter how much reforms. It doesn't matter how much police cameras. It doesn't matter. The fact is that it's a police state. And when you look at different countries, the more severe police states, those tend to be the countries where Black people are. And that's not a coincidence to me when you look at things like Brazil, or not even just Black people, but particularly when you have a class of people who are being exploited and disenfranchised to such a severe degree. That tends to be where you have the most aggressive police brutality. So moving on to the international scope, though, do we think that African unity is possible without some type of ideal of self-defense? What I mean by that is we all agree that when Africa is actually free from neo-colonial powers, that it will be in a position where it's a threat to the dominance of other countries that are white supremacist or other type of countries, whether it be Chinese or whatever. So we all know this is a threat to the existence of white supremacy. So what do we think will happen if we actually are liberated and we don't have some type of way to defend ourselves? As we know, there are a handful of countries that have nuclear weapons. Not one country that is majority Black is on that list. And so even in that situation, we say in America, we would never feel safe walking outside being Black. And in Africa, even Africa that's not infiltrated by neo-colonial control, I would not feel safe knowing that these people who want my minerals, who want my land, have nuclear weapons and we have not. So what do we do about this? Is there a way that we can organize both? Or do we trust that in a situation that Africans actually are free from neocolonial policies of different institutions like the World Bank and the IMF? In that situation, when we actually are free, do we think that we'll be able to rely on a human rights stance that you can't just nuke us because you want our minerals? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, let me come in. To answer the question of AU, whether African people can defend themselves without any kind of or I think if I can get a question right, the question was, with AU, can African people defend themselves without some kind of a power or something like that? If I can get a question right, I mean, I think I would say no. As long there is colonial influence, African people can never defend themselves, because one, as long there is colonial influence, we will not be able to even get, that's a nuclear weapon, because with the colonialists or with the imperialists, they know that the fight, if African people even have or even put their hand on nuclear weapon, they will no longer get, in a sense that they will never get our resources no more, because we have something that we can base on to frighten them, to put fear in them, like what North Korea is doing right now. Do you think North Korea, the imperialists are actually trying to ally with North Korea because North Korea have abundant resources or whatsoever? It's just because North Korea have a nuclear weapon that they're trying to ally with to get it from them. And just because of that nuclear weapon, I can assure you that North Korea is part of the superpower right now, because you can see what's been going on right a recent time. They've been having meetings from here and there, from here and there. Well, North Korea is not going to easily give it, or is never going to give their nuclear weapon, because they have seen as something that they can base on, to be part of that superpower power, or part of that superpower that they all can now go and sit down and discuss and have meeting and say, look, you know what? If you can't do this too, we are not going to do this, and we are going to do this. So the rest of the superpower forced to agree to North Korea, because what they have, North Korea also have it. So there is, what am I saying? I'm saying here, there is something North Korea have to put fear in America. If America want to do anything against her citizen or against their citizen. But with the African people, generally, we have nothing to put fear in these imperialists, or to put fear in America if they want to do anything against or the African continents. We have nothing. They can run over all like this. So the AU is not even close nowhere. So we can go to China too. China was nowhere. But right now, America can't go close to China, because China too also have something that they can depend on to hold down America if America want to try them. With the African continent, we have nothing to hold down America. If America want to try, we have nothing. Now, with China, I mean with Russia. So in fact, we have seen recent again, that go again to our earlier discussion, where we have to extend outside if we really want to seek power and to become in power. We in recent time we have seen Venezuela, where Venezuela have this kind of outside backing that even can make America to fall back. Now we're seeing China backing Venezuela. We're seeing Russia backing Venezuela. All those people are superpower, and Venezuela have reached out to them and to extend to them to get power. So another superpower coming to say, look, you better back off from Venezuela. China coming out saying it. China, military coming out. China sending military. Russia sending military. So all those things can put fear in America, to fall back, because there is outside forces, or there is outside power that will put fear in there. But with the African continent, we don't have nothing like that. So we have to have something that can bail our house and that we can use as a power to frighten other people, but we don't have it.
And that's a good point, because as you said, Venezuela, right now their only allies are basically China, Russia, and I believe there's some other countries, but not a lot. But without, China and Russia, what do they have? They have nuclear weapons. They have a military. They pose a threat, because we know if, for example, a bunch of other countries backed Venezuela that did not have any type of way to actually back up their support, that would mean nothing. I think the only reason the U.S. is trying to take their time and maneuver that situation over there is because Russia has been very clear, because, Russia actually has a monetary interest in Venezuela, but they've been very clear that, we're not supporting this. And if you try to do something, we're going to, take an adversarial stance against that. So, it's a crazy thing that, if you notice, for example, with African leaders, I think it's no coincidence that the ones who push nonviolence are often celebrated. And I'm not saying anything against their character. Obviously, any Black person who will fight for Black liberation, I don't care if I agree with everything you did. Me, I have not achieved anything near to what Martin Luther King achieved for the Black community. I've achieved nothing close to what Nelson Mandela did to the Black community. And I don't like when people just write them off and say, oh, they're coons, but what have you done for your people? And most of these people have done nothing but post comments online calling them coons, So you have to be fair. Like, you might not agree with how they went about things, but these are people who, Nelson Mandela went to prison for y'all. Most of these dudes who want to talk about them, say that they're coons, would not be going to prison for the Black community. Martin Luther King literally died for y'all. Most of y'all who talk and have all this, lip game, y'all would not be dying for your people. So, let's respect our ancestors regardless of what differences we might have with them. But, it is interesting that those are the leaders that are celebrated. Whereas if you look in European culture, Winston Churchill celebrated, Franklin Roosevelt, these people who basically won wars on behalf of their countries. Those are the people who are very often celebrated. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that there's Nelson Mandela Day and everyone talks about Nelson Mandela, and Western media will circulate things about him. And hardly anyone will say Thomas Sankara Day. Hardly anyone will say Nkrumah Day. It's not a coincidence that, the Western media, they'll push Dr. King, but no one will say anything about Malcolm X, or no one will say anything of, people like Farrakhan are completely demonized. No one says anything about the Black Panthers. So we have to understand that we have been socialized to feel like we have to take an approach that our oppressor is not taking. When we talk about diplomacy, there's a type of diplomacy that they're taking that we are not trying to take. And, I'm in no way advocating death to anyone. To me, when Malcolm said by any means necessary, he was saying, hopefully we can be freed without any death. Hopefully we can, be freed and not have to, have any human life loss. Hopefully Europeans will allow Africans to be sovereign. Hopefully white people will allow Blacks in America to live peacefully without any type of violence. That's what I think everyone wants. Now, who determines that? It's not us who determines that. It's actually the people in power. We don't decide whether or not violence is necessary for us to be free. It's the people who are in a position to actually make those moves, those power moves. And unfortunately, from what we've seen, it seems like violence has to be on the table, So anyone else want to comment on this issue, particularly in the internet?
Yeah, let me comment. Because you're right about Malcolm X. Malcolm X also said the price of freedom is death. He was clear about that, and he showed it. He gave his life. Now, we've sacrificed a lot already, so maybe we won't have to sacrifice so many, but it's going to be more deaths, and it's going to be more violent. And a war is coming, and really pretty much has started already. That's going to happen. Like, our situation here, as far as self-defense, is different. Domestically, it's different than Africa. In Africa, I think, like we said before, you have to be proactive. And I think the most proactive way we can defend ourselves is by separating from white people. Nobody wants to touch this topic. It's too touchy for people. It's too radical for people to say that we want to separate from white people. Why not? We're already separated mostly anyway. In Chicago, like literally each ethnicity has their own town. Like literally, there's a Little Italy, there's Jewtown, there's Humboldt Park, which is mostly Puerto Ricans or Hispanics or whatnot. So why is it then when black people say we want to separate from white people, it's a problem, especially for white people? Why is that a problem? You got to start thinking, wait, why if they hate it so much, it's a problem. Usually that means it's good for us. Like, why don't they want us to separate? They don't want to be around us. You see what happens when blacks try to move into white people neighborhoods. You get a little money and you move into there. And J. Cole said, like, they called the police on him. They thought he must be a drug dealer. How could he possibly be living in this neighborhood? They didn't know who he was. White people called the police on him. We separate. That's the best way to defend ourselves, especially here, because we just don't have the manpower to go at war with a police state backed by a U.S. military, which happens to be the most powerful military in the world. Like, we have to separate and then find a way to just defend ourselves once we're separated. In Africa, they just have to stop being so nice and just realize who the enemy is. If you don't know that white supremacy is the enemy by now, you shouldn't be in leadership. But like I said, the revolutions, they're popping up everywhere now. It's going to be a war. Hopefully, what we want is to support any nation, any political party who's in Africa is saying no white supremacy, no colonialism, no nothing. Like, you can go. You can go, or we got to get rid of you. Like, that's just how it has to be.
Dwayne, can you talk about the other hurdle to so as we stated, and I want to state this again first, like, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, we're not talking about the countries in Africa as they are, that they're in the position to actually enforce Pan-Africanism. The reason why is because all of those countries are still colonized, albeit it's not formal, but when you look at the way that these leaders are put into power and supported by Western governments, and these leaders are basically, even some who want to do good, are basically coerced by Western powers to actually do policies that will benefit Western powers, Africa's not free. So when we talk about things going on in Africa, we are starting from the premise that Africa is still colonized. Colonization has not ended, and so we have to end it before we actually can have a free Africa. Dwayne, can you talk about the issue that we have of outside governments basically owning the militaries in Africa? I know, for example, in Togo, there's a lot, the military is basically the French military. They pay for their equipment, they give them, military weapons, and I believe also a condition of the CFA franc, I believe, or one of the positions with the French government's relation to Togo is that Togo is not allowed to even engage in military conflict without getting the French government's permission. So can you talk about that hurdle to actually being in the position to enforce self-defense?
Yeah, and I mean, Togo is a perfect example because we could start with the fact that Togo currently is the oldest military dictatorship on the African continent. This is a dictatorship that's been in power since 1967. So, Togo, when you look at countries on the continent, Togo is really the best example of foreign control of African militaries. And you mentioned, France, but it's not just France alone. Israel, plays a big role in providing military support to Togo, especially in terms of security. I read a report last year that exposed the fact that Israelis are behind providing technology for the Togolese government to spy. The United States also plays an important role in providing military support for Togo in terms of military training, equipment. I mean, obviously, there's the Afrikan program that has military bases across the African continent. And what I also want to say about Togo real quickly too, although this is a separate issue, but recently the United States granted Togolese government $35 million in aid. So we were talking before about how the importance of looking at things from an international perspective. That's one example, because the same United States government that has African Americans here living in completely poor and neglected and dilapidated communities somehow has millions of dollars to ship over to Africa to support these dictatorships and support these military regimes. So that's something we have to keep in mind, that the same government that doesn't do anything for the African people here somehow has the resources to support oppression over people on the continent. But in terms of self-defense and military, that's the biggest issue with Africa, is that Africans are completely reliant to foreign powers for military equipment. That's not just Europe and American, not just European countries and America. Even Asian countries have, played a big role in supplying military equipment to African countries. South Korea, not South Korea, North Korea, for example, China are just some examples of Asian countries that have supplied military weapons to African countries. So when you look at the African continent, you really don't find too many countries that are capable of even producing their own military equipment. And the point that I make very often is that when we talk about black on black violence here in the United States, we have to look at the fact that the guns that we use to kill each other aren't even produced in our own communities. These guns are coming in from the outside, and we're using guns that are given to us by outsiders to kill each other. On the African continent, it's the same situation. When you look at these civil wars, Africans aren't even producing weapons that they're using to kill each other in these civil wars. They're coming from outside sources. So what happens too is not only are Africans not capable of building their own military infrastructure, but these weapons are coming in from outside. Others are dictating what Africans get to do these weapons. So, for example, if rebels in the Congo want to wage war against their own people and go into villages and rape civilians, they could find weapons to do that. Now, let's say, for example, the Congo decides we want to have a revolution, we want to kick the Belgian and the American influence out of our country. No European country is going to be eager to flood weapons into the Congo to allow them to overthrow white supremacy. So that's the big issue when you don't have the capacity to produce your own weapons to defend yourself, that whatever weapons are going to be given to you are going to be given to you for a specific purpose. And I'll end by talking about South Africa, because you mentioned Nelson Mandela, and a lot of people don't even realize Mandela was jailed because he was waging an armed struggle against the apartheid regime in South Africa. And the reason why he was held for so long is because he refused to denounce violent struggle. He said he would announce violent struggle when the apartheid regime stopped inflicting violence on the African people. See, a lot of people don't realize that. What I want to make is that during this period, Ethiopia actually had a firearms factory. So Ethiopia was supplying rebels like Nelson Mandela and others in South Africa and Zimbabwe, and providing weapons for those people. But that just demonstrates the importance of having an African country that can produce weapons, so that when you have liberation struggles across the continent, you can go to African sources for weapons as opposed to looking for foreign sources. Because, as I said, no European country is going to arm Africans to overthrow white supremacy.
Absolutely. I want to remind everyone in the chat, if you are interested in joining FAL, I have a pinned comment under the comments, and you can actually see the link to our Facebook page, see the link to our application. And in addition, if you please would subscribe to the FAL YouTube channel, because eventually, as I've stated in previous videos, we're going to move our live streams onto that channel. So if you could please subscribe. And as I stated in the beginning of the video, we have our brother Victor Pate, who is so gracious to join us. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on our live streams, you would have to be an FAL member. So, please go through that process if that's what you would like to do, and also organize with Pan-Africanism. So, any closing thoughts from anyone before we close out?
May I add to the close out? One thing is to understand the threat of nuclear force is also a stabilizing factor, because all the major nuclear weapons that are sitting in the world right now would have a devastating effect on anywhere in the planet that they use in one area. It's going to affect the global ecology drastically now. Those weapons are almost basically unusable. They're suicidal. And so it's more of a threat factor. The other thing is, just because we don't know what Africans are doing, the number one offense is covert activity. Just because we don't know doesn't mean it's not happening in the African continent. It's just like we don't know everything happening in the US. It's important to understand that by now everybody understands you just can't blatantly build a nuclear arsenal right on top of the world and let everyone know it. And to do it covertly is a challenge, because there's a lot of ways to see someone working with certain materials, but there's also ways to conceal it. And I don't put it past our people that we're not creating our own force and military in different areas of this world. And I think these other countries, including the US, are very aware of that. We're being led to think that we're not doing for self. Those weapons that we get over in Africa are hand-me-down weapons and mostly used for defense, not offense. They're never giving the right weapons for us to hurt hurt the colonizers and those oppressing us, but they're just to help them maintain social control. I don't put it past us. We're very intelligent people. We understand we just can't blatantly say we're building a military. We just can't blatantly say that we're creating revolution. I have some confidence if there's a belief factor that we are doing those kind of things right now, and we understand the situation of the world. We have some idiots in office in various countries and just like the United States, but we have some very intelligent people doing some hard work too. So that's just sort of a point of optimism to close out.
Any other closing comments before we log off? So I think that's everyone. Everyone, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you inside of another broadcast. As I said, please check out that the links that I put inside of the description, not the description, inside of a pinned comment. And we hope to see you in our future broadcast. So you all have a great day.